Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The sun was setting over the quiet mountain village where Caitlin had spent most of her life. The evening sky blazed with hues of red and orange, casting long shadows on the cobblestone street. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of pine, but something felt different today. A strange energy had settled in the valley, and Caitlin couldn't shake the feeling that her life was about to change. She wandered down the familiar path toward the old village library. It wasn't too much a small stone building tucked away at the edge of town, but it was a sanctuary for Caitlin. Her father had spent years in there poring over ancient texts and maps, chasing legends that most people dismissed as mere stories. He had always believed in the existence of the door to the secret realm, a mythical portal said to connect countless worlds. When he disappeared during one of his expeditions 5 years ago, Caitlin vowed to continue his work. She'd become an adventurer like him, though her expeditions hadn't led her far from the village until now. As Caitlin entered the library, the musty scent of old parchment hit her. She greeted the elderly librarian with a nod and headed straight for the back shelves, where her father-sent maps were still kept. She had gone through them dozens of times, tracing the lines with her fingers, trying to see what he saw. Tonight, however, something felt different as she approached the shelf. One of the old maps seemed to glow faintly, a soft, ethereal light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. Caitlin hesitated, her hand hovering above the glowing map. It was one she hadn't noticed before. The edges were frayed, and the ink had faded with age, but the glow remained. She picked it up carefully, feeling a warmth spread through her fingers. As she unrolled the map, her breath caught in her throat. The markings were unlike anything she'd seen before, strange symbols and intricate lines that seemed to shift and move on their own. What is this? Suddenly, the library felt too small, too confined. The air around her seemed to thrum with energy, and a voice echoed in her mind, soft but insistent. Find the door. The time has come. Without thinking, Caitlin grabbed the map and bolted from the library, ignoring the startled look from the librarian. She ran through the village streets, her heart pounding in her chest. The map pulsed in her hand, guiding her toward the mountain path. She didn't know how she knew, but she was certain the door was real, and it was waiting for her. The cave entrance was hidden behind a thick curtain of ivy, almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. Caitlin hadn't been to this part of the mountain in years, not since her father had first taken her here as a child, telling her stories of the ancient door that lay beyond. Now, as she stood at the entrance, the memory of his voice filled her mind. This door connects worlds, Caitlin, he had said, but it's not just any door. It's a gateway to infinite possibilities. One day you'll understand. And now it seemed that day had come. With a deep breath, Caitlin pushed aside the ivy and stepped into the cave. The air inside was cool and damp, the walls lined with strange carving. She held up the map, which continued to glow softly, illuminating the path ahead. Her footsteps echoed in the narrow passage as she made her way deeper into the cave. The path twisted and turned, growing darker with each step, but Caitlin felt no fear. There was something guiding her, something that felt both familiar and foreign. The deeper she went, the more the cave seemed to change. The walls shifted, the air thickened, and soon she found herself standing in front of a massive stone door. The door was unlike anything she had ever seen. It was covered in intricate roundness, glowing faintly with the same light as the map. Caitlin's heart raced as she approached it, her hand outstretched. As her fingers brushed against the cold stone, a surge of energy shot through her and the runes flared to life. The door groaned as it began to open, the ancient seal breaking with a deafening crack. Caitlin stepped back, her eyes wide with wonder. On the other side of the door was not just another cave, but a swirling, shimmering void, like a window into countless different worlds. The colors twisted and blended, forming shapes and landscapes that were both familiar and alien. Caitlin stared, mesmerized, but before she could fully process what was happening, the ground beneath her feet shook violently. The seal was broken, and with it, the balance between the worlds. Reality itself seemed to ripple and bend, the edges of the void spilling out into her world. Suddenly, a voice rang out, clear and commanding. "You are the chosen guardian." Caitlin spun around to see a figure standing in the shadow. It was a tall, ethereal being, cloaked in silver and light, its face obscured by a shimmering veil. "The door has been unsealed," the figure continued, its voice echoing in the cave. "The worlds are colliding, and only you can repair the damage.
I don't hear. Caitlin stammered, backing away from the door as the void continued to pulse and twist.
The balance between worlds has been broken. The being said, if the seal is not repaired, all worlds will collapse into chaos. You have been chosen as the guardian of the door. It is your duty to restore the seal and prevent the destruction of the multiverse. Caitlin says, mind raced. She had always dreamed of adventure, but this was far beyond anything she had imagined. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on her, but at the same time, something inside her stirred a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. What do I have to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her inside. The figure extended a hand, and in its palm appeared a small, glowing crystal. Take this, it said. It is a shard of the Nexus, the place where all worlds converge. You must travel to the Nexus and use this shard to repair the seal. Along the way, you will encounter others beings from different worlds who will aid you in your journey. But beware, for there are forces that wish to see the worlds destroyed. Caitlin took the crystal, feeling its warmth pulse through her fingers. The weight of the task ahead loomed large, but she knew there was no turning back now. I'll do it, she said, her voice resolute. The figure nodded once before, fading into the shadows, leaving Caitlin alone in front of the swirling void. With a deep breath, she stepped through the door. The sensation of passing through the door was unlike anything Caitlin had ever experienced. It was as if her body was being stretched and pulled in every direction, her mind spinning as reality shifted around her. For a brief moment, she wasn't sure if she was still herself or if she had become something else entirely. Then, with a sudden jolt, it was over. Caitlin stumbled forward, her feet hitting solid ground. She blinked, trying to steady herself as the world around her came into focus. She was no longer in the cave. Instead, she found herself standing in the middle of a vast, barren landscape. The sky above was a strange shade of purple swirling with dark cloud. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and dry, like the remnants of a once thriving world that had been ravaged by some unseen force. Caitlin took a deep breath, her heart still racing from the journey through the door. She glanced down at the glowing crystal in her hand, its light flickering faintly in the strange twilight. I have to find the Nexus, she reminded herself. That's it, the only way to fix this. But before she could take another step, a sudden noise caught her attention, a faint metallic clinking sound, growing louder with each passing second. Caitlin seemed instinctively went to the hilt of the sword strapped to her side, her senses on high alert. Out of the swirling mist emerged a figure, tall, clad in gleaming silver armor. The figure's face was obscured by a helmet, but as they approached, they lifted the visor, revealing a sharp, calculating gaze. You must be the Guardian, the figure said, their voice calm and measured. Caitlin narrowed her eyes, her grip tightening on her sword. Who are you? I am Serene, the figure replied, lowering their sword slightly in a gesture of peace. A warrior from a world far from here, I was sent to aid you in your quest to repair the seal. Caitlin studied Serene for a moment, her instincts telling her they could be trusted, but still the weight of the task ahead made her cautious. Why were you sent? She asked, her voice steady but filled with curiosity. The Nexus affects all worlds, Serene explained. If the seal is not repaired, my world along with countless others will fall into chaos. I was chosen to help you because of my knowledge of the Nexus and the challenges we will face. Caitlin hesitated, but the urgency of the situation left her with little choice. She nodded slowly, lowering her sword. All right, she said. Let's find the Nexus. Caitlin and Serene moved quickly through the barren landscape, the silence between them punctuated only by the sound of their footsteps on the cracked ground. The sky above swirled with unnatural energy, a constant reminder of the broken balance between worlds. Caitlin clutched the glowing crystal tightly, feeling the weight of her responsibility in every step. As they moved, Caitlin's mind raced with questions. Who was this warrior Serene? Why had they been chosen to help her? And what other dangers awaited them? But there was no time for idle conversation. Every second wasted meant the worlds were one step closer to collapsing into chaos. Before long, they reached the edge of a jagged cliff below them. A vast chasm stretched out, its depths shrouded in darkness. Strange, glowing vines hung from the cliffside, pulsing faintly with the same light as the Nexus crystal. This is the first rift, Serene said, his voice cutting through the stillness. The fabric of reality is weakest here. We'll need to cross this chasm to reach the Nexus. But be careful, things are not always as they seem. Caitlin peered over the edge, her heart skipping a beat as she gazed into the abyss. The air above the chasm shimmered, distorting the landscape like a mirage. She could feel the pull of the rift, a force tugging at the edges of her consciousness, tempting her to lose focus. "How do we cross?" Caitlin asked, gripping the crystal more tightly. Saran stepped forward, his eyes scanning the chasm. "The vines," he said, pointing to the glowing tendrils that hung from the cliffside. "They reconnected to the nexus. If we can use them to swing across, we'll reach the other side." Caitlin swallowed hard. It was a risky plan, but there was no other option. She nodded and moved closer to the edge, her breath catching in her throat as she reached for one of the vines. The moment her hand made contact with it, the vine pulsed with energy, as if responding to her touch. "Ready?" Saran asked, his voice steady. Caitlin nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. With a swift movement, she swung herself off the edge of the cliff, the vine carrying her through the air. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The world around her blurred, the chasm below twisting and shifting as the rift's power distorted reality. Then, with a thud, her feet hit solid ground. Caitlin let out a breath she hadn't to realize she was holding and glanced back to see Saran following closely behind. He landed gracefully beside her, his armor clinking softly as he straightened. "We made it," Caitlin said, her voice a little shaky. Saran gave a curt nod. "This is only the beginning." As they continued forward, the landscape began to change. The barren wasteland gave way to lush, green forests, the air filled with the sound of rustling leaves and distant bird call. But something was off. Caitlin could feel it in her bones. The forest was too quiet, too still, like it was holding its breath. Without warning, a figure darted out from the trees, moving so fast that Caitlin barely had time to react. A blade flashed in the dim light, and serene as sword was up in an instant, deflecting the strike with a loud clang. The attacker was a wiry man dressed in dark leather, his eyes sharp and calculating. He moved with a fluid grace, his every movement precise and deadly. Caitlin drew her own sword, stepping into a defensive stance as the man circled them. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice firm. The man smirked, twirling his blade with practiced ease. "Just a traveler passing through," he said, his voice smooth. "But it seems I've stumbled upon something interesting. You wouldn't trick into be carrying a Nexus crystal, would you?" Caitlin's heart skipped a beat. How did this stranger know about the crystal? Saran stepped forward, his sword pointed at the man. "This is none of your concern," he said. "Coldly stand down, or you'll regret it." The man chuckled, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Oh, I am afraid I can totally do that. You see, I've been looking for a Nexus crystal for quite some time now, and I am not about to let it slip through my fingers." Without another word, the man lunged at them again, his blade moving in a blur of steel. Caitlin parried his strikes, her muscles burning with the effort. This man was faster than anyone she'd ever faced. But there was something else, something unnatural about the way he moved. It was as if he was always one step ahead, predicting her every move. Saran joined the fray, his sword flashing as he moved to block the man's attack. But even together, they were barely able to hold him off. The stranger fought with a savage precision, his strikes relentless and unyielding. Just as Caitlin felt her strength beginning to wane, a sudden burst of light erupted from the crystal in her hand. The man recoiled, his eyes wide with shock as the light enveloped him, forcing him back. Taking advantage of the moment, Caitlin surged forward, her sword slicing through the air. The man dodged, but not quickly enough. Her blade caught his arm, drawing a thin line of blood. The man cursed under his breath, his expression darkening. "This isn't totally over," he growled, backing away into the shadows. "You may have won this round, but I'll be seeing you again." With that, he disappeared into the trees, leaving Caitlin and Saran standing in the clearing, their breaths heavy and ragged. "Who was that?" Caitlin asked, her heart still racing. Saran sheathed his sword, his brow furrowed in thought. "I don't know, but he was no ordinary traveler. He knew about the crystal, and that means others do, too. We'll need to be more careful." Caitlin nodded, her mind still reeling from the encounter. Whoever that man was, he was dangerous. And if there were more like him out there, their journey was going to be even harder than she'd anticipated. They pressed on, the forest growing denser around them. The path ahead was unclear, but Caitlin could feel the pull of the Nexus growing stronger with each step. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, the very fabric of reality shifting and bending in strange ways. After what felt like hours of walking, they emerged into a wide clearing. In the center stood an ancient stone archway covered in glowing rime. Beyond the archway, the landscape flickered and shifted like a window into another world. "The Nexus," Saren said, his voice slow and reverent. Caitlin's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer to the archway. This was it, the place where all worlds converged. The crystal in her hand pulsed with energy, its light growing brighter as they approached. But before they could enter, the air around them rippled, and a figure appeared in front of the archway. It was a tall, cloaked figure, its face hidden beneath a dark hood. The very air around it seemed to warp and twist as if reality itself was bending to its will. "You have come far, Guardian," the figure said, its voice a low echoing rumble, "but your journey ends here." Caitlin stepped back, her hand tightening around the crystal. "Who are you?" The figure laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "I am the void. The Nexus belongs to me, and I will not allow you to repair the seal. The worlds will fall into chaos, and from the ashes, I will rebuild them in my image." Caitlin's blood ran cold. This was the force the Guardian had warned her about, the entity that sought to destroy the multiverse, and now it stood between them and the Nexus. Saren drew his sword, his eyes blazing with determination. "We won, Tetua. You destroy the world." The void chuckled, raising a hand. "You cannot stop me. I am the end of all things." Without warning, the ground beneath them shook violently, and the air around them darkened. Tendrils of shadow erupted from the ground, coiling around Caitlin and Serene, pulling them toward the void. Caitlin struggled against the shadows, her mind racing. She could feel the power of the Nexus, so close yet so far. If they didn't act quickly, everything would be lost. With a surge of determination, she reached out to the crystal, feeling its warmth flood through her. The light within it flared, cutting through the shadows like a blade. The tendrils recoiled, hissing as they disintegrated into nothingness. The void snarled, its form flickering as the light from the crystal grew brighter. "This is not over," it hissed, its voice filled with venom. "You may have won today, but the multiverse will be mine." With that, the figure vanished, leaving Caitlin and Cern standing in the clearing, the archway to the Nexus glowing softly before them. Caitlin let out a shaky breath, her body trembling with exhaustion. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. Cern sheathed his sword, his gaze fixed on the Nexus. "We need to repair the seal before it's too late." Caitlin nodded, stepping toward the archway. She could feel the pull of the Nexus, stronger than ever, the crystal in her hand pulsing in rhythm with the energy around them. Without another word, they stepped through the archway, into the heart of the Nexus.